Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something a little different. Drift back across the ages, barefoot and curious, to watch the first sparks of human civilization catch flame in the darkness. It'll be cold, smoky, and let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this era longer than a single winter. What with wild predators, food shortages, and a tragic lack of toothpaste. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from and what time it is on your clock right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is crisp and sharp as you step forward, feet sinking slightly into packed earth. You can smell wood smoke curling lazily into a sky sprinkled with unfamiliar constellations. Before you, a half circle of figures huddle close to a fire that dances and snaps, casting long shadows on the cave walls behind them. Your breath fogs in the cold, and you catch yourself wondering what it must have felt like to see fire for the first time. Not as a destructive force that scorched forests and frightened animals, but as a companion that brings warmth, protection, and eventually, the slow dawn of human community. One of the hunters, hair tangled and darkened by soot, strikes flint against stone, the tiny sparks arcing into dried grass. Catches, glows, then flares, and the quiet relief that sweeps through the group is almost as warm as the flames themselves. Historians widely agree fire wasn't just a tool, it was the heartbeat of early society, pulling people together at night to share warmth, stories, and roasted tubers that probably tasted better than they smelled. Your eyes wander across the firelit walls, where ochre and charcoal animals run in frozen motion. A handprint pressed deliberately into clay almost seems to wave at you across thousands of years. You wonder whose hand it was, a child's, a shaman's? Historians still debate whether these images were spiritual symbols, hunting guides, or maybe just the world's oldest version of doodling while bored around the campfire. A sudden breeze carries the scent of damp earth, and something faintly gamey, a reminder that even the smallest meals had to be hunted, trapped, or gathered with care. You crouch, feeling the chill seep through rough hide garments, and watch as someone passes around roasted roots, charred on the outside, steaming on the inside. You're not sure you'd call it delicious, but it's filling, and the soft hum of shared conversation feels timeless. One of the elders begins a story. His voice is gravelly, each pause filled by the pop and hiss of burning wood. He speaks of giant beast creatures as tall as trees with curling tusks, of spirits in rivers and voices in the wind. And although you don't understand the words, the tone alone wraps around you like a well-worn blanket. The funny thing? We still tell stories like this to dames to explain thunderstorms, legends to remember ancestors, bedtime tales to soothe restless minds. The difference is mostly in the vocabulary and the production budget. You notice someone carving a tool, a long, narrow flake of flint, chipped patiently into a sharp edge. The process is slow, deliberate, and oddly hypnotic, each tap echoing faintly in the cavern's gloom. Archaeologists found thousands of these tools scattered across ancient campsites, proof of quiet skill passed hand to hand, generation to generation, long before anyone wrote down a single word. The fire crackles, throwing fresh sparks upward like tiny, momentary stars. You can almost feel the tension in the group loosen as darkness gives way to warmth and light. It strikes you how fire didn't just protect early humans from predators, stretched the day into the night, giving time for laughter, quiet reflection, and that comforting togetherness we still crave on cold evenings. A child curls up beside the storyteller, soot-smudged cheeks resting against a fur-wrapped arm. For a moment, the only sounds are the slow, steady breathing of people drifting into sleep, the soft tapping of flint, and the occasional bark of a distant animal. There's something grounding about this moment. You're standing at the dawn of fire and stone, before cities, kings, written records, and yet you can recognize so much. Community, art, shared meals, and the universal human urge to leave a mark on the world, even if it's just a handprint on a damp cave wall. And here's a detail most people miss. Early humans didn't always huddle deep inside caves. Many paintings appear near cave entrances, where light could reach, suggesting these artworks were made for living eyes, not hidden rituals. But historians still wonder if there were deeper chambers painted for eyes that never blinked, spirits, ancestors, or unseen forces guiding the clan. The wind outside picks up, carrying the scent of rain-soaked moss. Someone at the fire pulls their cloak tighter, and for a heartbeat. You feel the raw fragility of life back then, one bad winter, and the stories could stop forever. And yet here you are, thousands of years later, listening to echoes of that first spark. The fire still burns, the stories still flicker, and even if the words change, the need to share them doesn't. Your eyelids feel heavier, lulled by the gentle rhythm of flint striking stone. The soft glow of fire on rock walls, and the comforting warmth of humanity's first invention that felt like home. The fire's glow fades behind you as you step away, your feet sinking into damp earth along a slow, winding river. The air is thick with the scent of wet reeds, silt, and something faintly sweet, maybe wildflowers or the muddy perfume of civilization just beginning to bloom. The dawn light glimmers on water that drifts lazily between high banks, carrying stories of floods that nourish and destroy in equal measure. You hear the splash of a fish breaking the surface, then the low murmur of people working nearby, shaping clay, stacking mud bricks, building not just shelters but entire worlds. This is where it happens. The quiet miracle of farming transforming wandering bands into villages and villages into kingdoms. Along the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, and the Yellow River. People learn to trust the rhythm of seasons, trading the chase of herds for the steady hope of harvests. You run your hand along the sun-warmed wall of a freshly built hut, the coarse surface flaking slightly under your fingertips, the walls smell of baked clay and straw, still damp from yesterday's labor. Inside, shadows move. Families, farmers, and potters, shaping a life as steady as the river's flow. Historians widely agree these river valleys were the cradles of civilization, places where irrigation turned wild floodplains into fields of barley and wheat. But they still puzzle over just how quickly it happened, whether it was a slow trickle of change or a rush of brilliant, desperate innovation born from hunger and flood. The mud bricks feel almost alive in your hands, warm from the sun, cool where shadows fall. It's strange to think these simple blocks outlasted entire dynasties. Whole cities vanished under drifting sand, but their bricks remain, whispering of grain stores, workshops, and narrow alleyways bustling with trade. A goat bleats nearby, startling a flock of ibis that rise into the pale sky. You watch the birds wheel and settle further downriver, the moment already gone. In the distance, men and women guide heavy sledges bearing blocks of stone, sweat glistening on their backs. They speak quietly, a steady rhythm of voices matching the slap of sandals on damp earth. It's easy to romanticize this age, but you probably wouldn't survive long in it. Floods could sweep away entire harvests, disease could spread through crowded villages, and a poor harvest meant the difference between plenty and famine. And then there were the kings and priests who decided how much grain stayed with the farmers, and how much went to feed the city's monuments to eternity. Yet something magical stirs here too. The first city walls rising from reed-choked banks. The first public squares filled with traders swapping beads, copper tools, and stories from lands you've never seen. The air carries the tang of dried fish, river mud, and the faintly metallic scent of hammered bronze. A potter sits cross-legged under a woven awning, spinning clay on a slow wheel. You watch as a plain lump transforms under calloused fingers into a graceful vessel, each ridge capturing a moment in time. Later, this pot might hold grain, oil, or maybe the ashes of someone loved and lost. You trace the shape of a seal carved with spirals and animals. One press into wet clay, and a trader's identity becomes official proof of ownership, debt, or promise. These tiny symbols lay the groundwork for what will become writing, bureaucracy, eventually the first attempts to keep track of more than just cattle and barley. A child runs by, splashing through a puddle, the water cooling your dusty skin for a heartbeat. She laughs a sound so pure it cuts across centuries. You realize that while empires rise and fall, the human heart stays stubbornly the same. The scent of baking bread drifts from an open-air oven, mingling with the sharper aroma of fish laid out to dry on woven mats. Your stomach rumbles softly, reminding you that civilization, at its core, begins with simple things: bread, water, shelter, and shared laughter around a table. Historians still wonder whether early cities were born out of necessity, crowds gathering to build defenses against raiders or from something closer to hope. The idea that life together, however chaotic, could be richer than life apart. Nearby, an elder points at the water level marked on a stone. Each flood leaves a memory, measured and scratched into rock, so the next generation remembers where safety ends and disaster begins. It's oddly comforting, this ancient version of we've been through worse. As the sun climbs, the air grows heavier, carrying the scent of warm clay, sweat, and a hint of incense drifting from a small shrine. You rest in the shade of a mud brick wall, your fingertips tracing graffiti scratched by some long-forgotten hand, just a name. Perhaps or a simple drawing of a fish. Proof, maybe, that someone once stood where you're standing now, waiting for the river to rise or fall. And so you sit, the river's breath on your skin, the murmurs of traders and builders swirling around you. It's here, on these slow, silt-rich banks, that humanity learned to plan beyond tomorrow. To build not just for survival, but for legacy. And as the water laps at your feet, you realize that every great city still whispers with the hush of river steady, patient, and never quite tamed. You follow the river's gentle curve until the breeze shifts, airing dry. Sun-baked heat that settles on your skin like a heavy cloak. Before you stretches a horizon of golden dunes, broken only by shapes so improbable they almost look unreal. Pyramids rising from the desert floor. Sharp-edged and ancient even by ancient standards. Your sandals crunch over drifting sand, each grain warmed by centuries of midday sun. Up close, the limestone blocks are chipped, weathered by wind and time, but still towering enough to tilt your head back until your neck aches. It's humbling and just a little unsettling, too. Realize these monuments were already old by the time Cleopatra met Julius Caesar. A low wind carries the scent of dust, sweat, and something faintly metallica, maybe the copper tools once used to smooth stone into place. You run your fingers over the rock, feeling the difference where workers left tool marks and where polished faces still gleam under the fierce Egyptian sun. Historians widely agree that the Great Pyramid alone used over 2 million blocks, each weighing more than a small car. But what still sparks debate is the how. Was it straight ramps? Spiral ones? Some lost method as forgotten as the names of the builders who hauled each block. In the distance, you hear the rhythmic beat of wooden mallets striking stone. Workers dressed in simple kilts pass in lines, their bodies glistening under the sun. The smell of baking bread and beer brewing in clay jars drifts from nearby barracks. Life at the pyramid's edge wasn't all toil and lashings. These workers, who were often skilled craftsmen rather than slaves, earned rations, medical care, and the pride of shaping something meant to outlast kingdoms. A playful breeze teases sand into your sandals, scratching at your ankles. You look up at a pyramid's sharp peak piercing the cloudless sky, and it hits you. You're not just witnessing architecture. You're standing inside a belief system so deep and confident it was carved in stone. Death wasn't an end here, but a doorway. Tomb walls shimmered with colorful scenes of the afterlife. Reed fields, feasts, and gods waiting to weigh the human heart against a feather. You step into a narrow corridor, ducking your head to avoid low, time-worn beams. The air shifts, cooler and still, carrying the dry, almost sweet scent of ancient dust. Faint carvings trace across the walls, hieroglyphs so finely etched you could run your fingertip along the grooves. Among them, the scarab, a sacred beetle, curls in stone, a symbol of rebirth that seems oddly comforting even now. And here's a detail people rarely hear. Pyramid builders sometimes left playful graffiti hidden on inner blocks notes like the drunkards of Menkaure or friends of Khufu gang. Proof that even inside a divine project, humans remained wonderfully human, scribbling jokes that only stone would remember. As you walk deeper, the corridor narrows, the light dims, and the air grows heavy with history. Wonder, as many do, why so much labor and stone was spent to protect a single royal body. Historians still debate whether the pyramid was purely a tomb, a celestial machine aligning with stars, or perhaps both, a bridge between this life and eternity. Your breath feels louder here, echoing softly off limestone walls. You pause, feeling the weight of centuries pressing close, and you can almost hear the whispered prayers of priests long gone, their words rising in candlelit chambers thick with incense. Beside, the desert heat hits you again like an opened oven door. Sunlight shimmers across the Giza Plateau, and beyond, you glimpse the distant Nile winding through a strip of green. It's easy to see why life clung to those fertile banks, while the desert waited patiently on either side, timeless and unchanging. A market hums nearby. Copper trinkets, scarabs carved from turquoise, tiny figurines of Bastet, the cat goddess. The scent of honeyed bread and perfumed oil mingles with goat hides drying in the sun. You notice a merchant painting black coal around their eyes, not just for beauty, but to keep the glare and flies at bay. It's a trick that still works, even millennia later. A cat slinks between stalls, its sleek body brushing against your ankle before slipping into the shade. You watch it go, reminded that Egyptians saw cats as protectors small, and watchful guardians of grain stores and spiritual balance alike. Your gaze drifts back to the pyramids, their scale somehow even greater at dusk, when shadows stretch across sand like outstretched wings. You catch yourself thinking, in the age of steel and glass, there's still nothing quite like this. The wind picks up, cool against sunburned skin, carrying a trace of incense from a nearby temple. You watch priests in white linen move gracefully, offering bread, beer, and prayers to statues with eyes inlaid with stone and metal gazes meant to pierce eternity. Historians widely accept that religion, power, and engineering merged seamlessly here, but still wonder why the style changed so quickly after the Pyramid Age. Perhaps cost, political upheaval, or simply changing tastes. Even eternity, it seems, is subject to fashion. As twilight paints the stones in soft gold and rose, you feel the hush of evening settle across the plateau. Workers head home. The breeze cools, and stars blink into a sky largely unchanged, since Khufu first dreamed of a monument taller than memory, and for a moment, standing on warm stone that still holds the day's heat, you feel small but strangely safe inside that vast human hope that something we build might outlast us. The sun dips lower behind the pyramids, and you turn your steps toward the east, where the river's breath gives way to the scent of damp clay and freshly carved reeds. Soon the air feels cooler and heavier, carrying the musky aroma of wet earth, oil lamps, and humanity's earliest attempt to capture thought itself. You duck under a low doorway and find yourself in a dim chamber where robed scribes bend over wooden tables, clay tablets laid out like unfinished sentences. The glow of oil lamps flickers on their faces, revealing concentration so intense you almost feel intrusive just by watching. The air smells of drying clay, bitter ink made from soot and gum, and the faint temps of sweat from hours spent hunched over. Fingers stained dark with ink glide deftly over fresh tablets, pressing wedge-shaped marks that catch the light and cast tiny shadows. Historians widely agree this cuneiform script built from nothing but lines and angles helped create something humanity had never known. Memory that outlived the person who held it. A scribe pauses to stretch cramped fingers. He holds the tablet close to a lamp, checking each mark. You can almost read the motion in his brows. Pride in a line well pressed, worry about a smudge that might turn barley into silver. The difference could spark a lawsuit or worse, the displeasure of a royal accountant. You trace your own fingertip over a discarded shard, feeling the hard ridges where the stylus bit into wet clay. The grooves are shallow, but somehow they carried the weight of empires. Lists of sheep, cords of taxes, prayers to unseen gods, and contracts that outlived their signatories by centuries. And here's a lesser-known truth. Some tablets contain casual notes reminders, practice exercises, even the occasional schoolboy's insult scratched hurriedly on the back. Proof that ancient scribes, like modern students, sometimes let the mind wander. A gust of wind stirs the curtain behind you, sending the smell of the courtyard drifting in. Baked bread, the sweetness of dates, and faint smoke from a potter's kiln. Outside, the low rumble of carts, braying donkeys, and the barked calls of traders blends into the background hum of city life. Yet inside, time feels slowed. The steady rhythm of stylus on clay, the quiet shuffle of sandals on rush mats, the occasional creak of a reed pen dipping into ink, each sound wraps around you, gentle and grounding. One scribe, barely more than a boy, leans over his work so closely his breath fogs the clay. He glances up, eyes tired but sharp, then back to the task. You wonder what drove him? Here ambition, family duty, or the simple need to be part of something that mattered beyond a single lifetime. Historians still puzzle over why writing first appeared where and when it did. Was it purely to track grain and goats? Or did it emerge from something deeper, human craving to leave a mark, to say I was here in strokes of wet clay? Beyond the walls, the city stretches. Narrow alleys where cats slip silently. Courtyards crowded with traders' voices, and ziggurats rising like layered cakes of sun-baked brick. On their steps, priests chant to gods whose names feel both alien and oddly familiar, gods of sun and moon. Love and war, whose blessings and curses shape destinies. You pause at the threshold of a storage room, its shelves stacked with hundreds of tablets, some still soft, some hardened in the kiln to survive centuries. The scent of scorched clay hangs faintly in the air, and you marvel that these small, breakable slabs can carry the stories of entire generations. A lamp guttering near the doorway casts dancing shadows that seem almost to whisper across the walls. The effect is eerie, but strangely comforting, as if the words pressed into clay years ago still murmur softly to anyone willing to listen. Nearby, a clay seal lies forgotten on a table. Its carving shows a king hunting lions from a chariot, the image so sharp it feels fresh despite the centuries. It's a message of power but also of vulnerability, a king forever locked in triumph, whether or not he truly succeeded. You step outside, the sudden brightness stinging your eyes. Sunlight glints off tablet shards scattered like fallen leaves in the dust. Broken piece still bears fragments of thought. Part of a prayer, a merchant's debt, or a name now long forgotten. A passing trader adjusts the cord of amphory, balanced on a donkey's back, the faint scent of olive oil trailing behind. You glimpse a boy chasing a hoop, laughter ringing through the Aliyah sound so universal it could belong to any century. Even in this orderly world of scribes and seals, humanity peeks through in small rebellions. A tablet hidden under robes to avoid taxes. A line of poetry scribbled where no overseer will see. The clay remembers everything, the official and the mischievous alike. And here's the wonder. Centuries from now, someone digging in dry earth might find these same tablets, run their fingers over the same wedge marks, briefly touch the lives of people who never dreamed of being remembered. As dusk softens the edges of mud brick walls, you look back at the scribes bent under lamplight. They work on, shaping history not with swords or crowns, but with simple lines pressed patiently into clay. And you realize memory isn't just what we hold in our heads, but what we leave behind in marks, in words and stories, waiting quietly in the dust to be found again. You leave the quiet hum of scribes behind and step into a broader world, where bronze blades catch the sun. Dust clings to sweat-damp skin, and stories bloom like wildflowers on every breath of wind. The ground beneath your sandals feels firmer, now trampled by countless armies and traders, whose footprints crisscross the dry plains and rocky hillsides. Ahead, the clang of metal on metal rings, sharp and rhythmic, echoing off stone walls. Smith wipes soot from his brow, his hammer striking red-hot bronze until sparks scatter like fireflies. The smell of hot metal mingles with dust, sweat, and the smoky tang of cooking fires drifting from a nearby camp. In the distance, city walls rise, your mud brick and stone ramparts patched and rebuilt, so often they look more like living organisms than architecture. Beyond them, the rooftops shimmer under a sky as hard and blue as polished lapis. You find yourself on a narrow battlefield track, littered with shards of broken spearheads and fragments of pottery. Each step stirs a powdery haze that carries the faint smell of blood, long since dried into the earth. Historians widely agree that the Bronze Age was as much about trade and culture as it is about conquest, but it's the battles we remember best. A shield leans against a wall, its polished surface reflecting the sun in quick, blinding flashes. You run your hand over the embossed symbols, lions, spirals, and thunderbolts marks, meant to terrify enemies and impress allies alike. The bronze feels cool despite the heat, but heavy, as if it holds the weight of the stories attached to it. Nearby, an old soldier sits sharpening a blade. His movements are slow, deliberate, and almost gentle, as if the weapon were a stubborn pet rather than an instrument of war. You wonder if he's thinking of the next battle or remembering the last, whether there's really much difference between the two. At the city gate, Merchants argue in a swirl of languages, their carts laden with tin, lapis lazuli, grain, and spices. Bronze tools glitter among the goods, chisels, axes, and small ornate knives intended less for fighting than for ceremony or trade. And here's a quirk you might not expect. Bronze was so valuable that broken weapons were often melted down and reforged. Somewhere, the same metal that once formed a king's dagger might have ended up as a farmer's sickle, as a new blade, destined for yet another dusty battlefield. You move through the market, the air alive with barter and half-told stories. Potter selling amphory claims his clay comes from riverbanks, blessed by the gods. A singer weaves tales of legendary kings whose armies marched farther than the horizon. Though historians still debate if those campaigns were fact, embellishment, or something in between. A group of children races past, bronze bells tied to their tunics, ringing in playful discord. You catch a flash of painted eyes on a ceramic figure, an image of a goddess watching silently from a vendor's stall, her gaze eternal, her meaning shifting with each generation. Above the market noise, a poet recites verses about heroes who toppled towers and wooed queens. His words float on the dusty air, blurring fact and myth until it hardly matters where history ends and legend begins. The sun dips lower, casting the city walls in copper and gold. Fires are lit, the smell of roasting lamb and baked bread rising into the breeze. You walk toward a hilltop temple where priests light lamps, their flames flickering in niches cut deep into stone. A carved stele stands at the entrance, its surface etched with lines of cuneiform. Some passages boast of kings' victories, while others list offerings so mundane: barley, oil, a single goat that they almost feel modern in their bureaucratic detail. And yet these records, mundane or grand, are what allowed these stories to outlast even the greatest conquerors. Historians still wonder at the speed with which entire Bronze Age cities could vanish, sometimes within a few decades, leaving behind only walls, shards, and half-remembered names. Was it drought, invasion, or a delicate web of trade collapsing under its own weight? No one knows for sure. You find a quiet spot atop the city wall as twilight deepens, the stones still warm beneath your palms. The breeze carries distant music of flute, a drum beat, and the low chant of prayers rising like smoke into the night sky. Your gaze drifts to the fields beyond, where ancient trade roads stretch into darkness, their ruts worn deep by carts and hooves. Once these roads tied distant cities together like threads in a vast tapestry of bronze, barley, and ambition. And sitting there, you feel how fragile it all was, and yet how stubbornly those stories linger. Even broken pots still speak of the hands that shaped them, and chipped blades remember the battles they survived. The night settles fully, the stars pricking through a sky the color of burnished iron. The air cools, scent of smoke and sweat softens, and the clang of the smith's hammer becomes an echo that fades into memory. And you realize the Bronze Age wasn't just about war and trade routes. It was a dawn of shared myth, of cities daring to rise higher than fear, and of people finding ways to write themselves into eternity, one clay tablet and hammered blade at a time. Morning finds you wandering away from the dusty clash of bronze and into a softer world, where olive trees twist like old men holding secrets, their silver-green leaves whispering under a mild breeze. The air feels different here, lighter, scented with warm stone, crushed herbs, and the faint tang of sea salt drifting inland from a distant coast. You walk through groves dappled in sunlight, sandals brushing fallen olives that leave faint stains on worn paths. Ahead, voices rise and fall not in anger, but in debate, playful and sharp as flint. Under the shade of a fig tree, a circle of men and women argue about truth, virtue, and why the sun seems to love some lands more than others. You settle on a low stone wall, its surface sun-warmed and rough, and listen. They don't shout so much as prod each other's ideas like a cat teasing a mouse. One asks, "What is justice?" Another counters, "Does it matter if no one sees?" The words drift around you, soothing and unsettling all at once. Historians widely agree ancient Greece wasn't a single country so much as a patchwork of fiercely independent city-states, united mostly by language, religion, and a stubborn love for argument. And here, under these same olive trees, ideas were forged that would ripple outward long after the statues crumbled. Nearby, a young student fidgets, clay tablet balanced on a knee, trying to keep pace with a bearded philosopher whose words tumble faster than the stylus can scratch. The philosopher pauses, notices the struggle, and with a dry chuckle slows down not because he must, but because questions matter more than answers. You lean back, the rough bark pressing into your shoulders, and watch sunlight flicker through branches. The breeze carries the scent of crushed thyme and roasted barley bread from a nearby stall. It's oddly comforting, the grand sweep of history punctuated by the smell of lunch. At the edge of the grove, statues half-finished lean against a workshop wall, marble torsos, heads waiting for chisels to breathe personality into them. A sculptor wipes dust from his hands, his tunic streaked with white, and steps back to judge his work in eternal dance between perfection and the small flaws that make a figure feel alive. And here's a lesser-known curiosity. Sometimes, sculptors deliberately left tiny imperfections, believing only the gods could create something truly flawless. A quiet nod, perhaps, to humility in an age that celebrated human achievement so boldly. You stroll further, sandals whispering across cracked flagstones, until the city unfolds before you. Columns rise like stone reeds. Market stalls buzz with rumor and trade, and everywhere. The sea glints in the distance, a constant reminder that no place here is too far from salt and sails. A philosopher leans against a sun-warmed column, arguing half-seriously that beauty itself might be a form of truth. Historians still debate whether these debates shaped policy directly, or whether they were simply the background music of a society deeply obsessed with the question, what does it mean to live well? A group of youths passes by, laughter echoing, laurel leaves tucked behind ears in playful mimicry of poets and champions. The scent of olive oil on skin and wine spilled on robes drifts by, mixed with the earthy sharpness of goat cheese warming in the sun. In a nearby square, you pause before a marble stele, its inscriptions half erased by time, as the words still speak, though faintly, of treaties signed and promises made, victories paraded in streets, and solemn reminders of what betrayal costs. And you notice something gently comic. A sparrow perches on the head of a heroic statue, tilting sideways as if to question the seriousness of it all. Even the city's pigeons seem to have opinions. Further uphill, the Parthenon rises columns, catching light in ways architects still study. The marble seems to glow from within, each block fitted so precisely that even centuries of earthquakes couldn't tear them apart entirely. You rest your hand against the stone, warm under your palm, and feel history pulse faintly back. As the sun dips, the city changes. The air cools. Torches flicker along narrow streets. The scent of fish grilling on coals, and the sharper temps of fermented wine slip through alleyways. Philosophers drift back to homes, words still tumbling from their lips like coins scattered in the dark. Historians wonder why Athens, Sparta, and their neighbors turned so fiercely inward, even while their ideas sailed the known world. Perhaps it was pride, fear, or the timeless struggle between what is ideal and what is merely possible. Sitting again under the olive trees, the breeze lifting your hair, you realize something quietly reassuring in every age. You're in humans. Argue, laugh, doubt, and reach for truth, even knowing perfection lies just beyond the next question. And as night covers the grove, the voices soften, becoming part of the rustle of leaves, the hush of distant waves, and the gentle certainty that it's not answers, but the asking itself that keeps us awake and gently, eventually lets us rest. Before dawn breaks fully, you rise and turn east, the olive groves fading behind you, replaced by the slow, undulating sway of a caravan winding its way through the dust. The air tastes of dry earth, warm sand, and a sharp hint of spice that tickles your nose even before you see its source. You find yourself atop a camel, its slow, swaying gait, oddly soothing, once you give in to the rhythm. Round you, traders guide, laden beasts, donkeys, horses, and more camels, each burdened with bales of silk, sacks of pepper and cinnamon, and folded carpets whose patterns blur in the morning light. The breeze carries the mingled scents of all these treasures. Sharp black pepper, sweet cinnamon, the subtle musk of raw silk still bearing the smell of distant mulberry groves. You feel the fine dust settle on your skin, almost gritty but perfumed by the caravan's cargo. Historians widely agree these routes, collectively called the Silk Roads, were never a single road, but a vast, shifting web of tracks and mountain passes. Goods moved slowly, hand to hand, through merchants, middlemen, and risk-takers, whose names history mostly forgot. and yet the roots they trod stitched together empires, beliefs, and tastes. A merchant riding beside you points out the distant shimmer of a caravanserai, a fortified inn where travelers rest, trade news, and argue over whose spices are best. You hear laughter carried on the wind, and the clink of copper coins changing hands even before you see the building. A detail you might not know: caravanserais often had their own small mosques, workshops in Welstini cities whose walls could shelter hundreds of travelers and animals when sandstorms swept across the plains. You dismount, feet touching earth warm from the morning sun, and stretch muscles stiff from riding. The caravanserai courtyard bustles. Men and women unload sacks. Horses drink noisily at stone troughs, and cook stir-pots that send up spirals of steam scented with lentils, onions, and cardamom. You watch a group of merchants unfold a carpet, revealing a dragon motif in deep reds and blues. A buyer runs his palm over it, fingers weighing not just the weave, but the story behind the colors. Dye from crushed insects, silk threads spun by unseen worms, and patterns borrowed and reworked over countless journeys. Nearby, a storyteller gathers listeners, voice low, but carrying in the morning stillness. He weaves tales of distant lands, white deserts where salt lies in sheets, mountains where snow never melts, cities built around gardens lush enough to shame Eden. You catch yourself leaning closer, lulled by the rhythm even as your skeptical mind wonders how much truth rides on each word. Historians still puzzle over the precise origins of many things traded here. Was it Chinese silk first reaching Rome? Or Roman glass winking on Chinese tables? The details blur, but the result remains. A cultural cross-pollination that shaped tastes, technologies, and even religions. As the caravan moves again, the scent of the road returns. Camel sweat, dusty wool, and the sweet spicy perfume of goods too valuable to open fully in the sun. You pass a rider carrying scrolls, fragile knowledge wrapped against wind and time. Perhaps philosophy, mathematics, or poetry, destined to inspire minds far from where the words were first inked. You ride through landscapes that change like turning pages, dry plains rippling with heat haze, narrow passes where rock walls rise sheer on either side, and high plateaus where thin air sharpens every sound. At night, the caravan circles for safety, and small fires bloom like scattered stars on the sand. You taste lentil stew thickened with stale bread, the spice warming more than the embers do. Camels groan softly, their shadows long and strange in firelight. Merchant leans close, telling of thieves who ride silently at night, blades curved like the crescent moon above. Yet even fear itself becomes part of the price of trade. Risk calculated as carefully as the weight of pepper in the saddlebags. And here's something quietly amusing. Black pepper, so common in kitchens now, was once worth its weight in gold in Europe. Imagine trading silks and spices through mountains and deserts, only to see someone sprinkle your fortune over roasted meat as if it were nothing. In the silence between stories, you hear the wind shifting sand across the stones, patient, relentless. A trader, wrapped in layers against the cold, stares into the fire and wonders aloud what roads his children will walk, or if they'll still trade spices and silk at all. Historians still debate what ended the great caravans: new sea routes, empires collapsing, or simply that ideas, unlike silk, can leap borders without camels or coin. As dawn breaks once more, the caravan rises, stretching and shaking off sleep. The road continues, not a single line on a map, but a living thing, always changing, always connecting. In riding alongside, you feel something gentle and unexpected. That every conversation, every story swapped over shared bread, is as precious as the silk and spices themselves, threads that wove distant worlds together, one dusty step at a time. You leave the dusty trail of the caravan behind and find yourself stepping onto cool stone, smooth beneath your sandals. The air shifts, heavier, almost sweet, scented with incense, candle wax, and old vellum. Stone columns rise on either side, their capitals carved with curling leaves and ancient symbols that catch the low light of hanging lamps. You're inside a library, a place that feels hushed, even in the rustling breath of history itself. Your footsteps echo softly, joining the quiet shuffle of robed figures gliding between tall shelves stacked with scrolls and codices. The smell here is almost intoxicating. Old parchment, lamp oil, cedar wood, and something faintly acidic that clings to ink as it ages. It's a living perfume of human thought, layered over centuries. You run your hand along the edge of a scroll, the cracked leather cover worn smooth, where countless fingers have opened it before yours. Historians widely agree the greatest of these libraries, Alexandria, Pergamon, and others, weren't just collections of texts, but living institutions of translation, debate, and sometimes rivalry so fierce it could set empires quarreling. A scholar nearby, robes ink-stained and singed from a lamp too close to parchment, reads aloud in a voice low and rhythmic. The words are ancient yet alive, musings on the shape of the world, the dance of stars, and the humbling realization that knowledge can outlast its creator, but only if someone keeps reading. You pause before a wall of scrolls, each labeled with a faded strip of papyrus. Some titles you recognize, works on geometry, medicine, astronomy. Others bear names in scripts so old they look like art more than language. You wonder who last unrolled them and whether anyone will again. And here's a gentle irony. These libraries weren't purely academic sanctuaries. They were power in rolled form. Kings hoarded books to outshine rivals, banned works that threatened their rule, and ordered copies seized from every ship sailing into harbor. Knowledge, it seems, has always been both torch and sword. Dust motes drift in the light falling through high, grilled windows. You trace a finger through the air, stirring tiny spirals of illuminated dust, and remember that parchment itself was once living skin, lamb, calf, or goat sits, sacrifice turned into the memory of civilizations. A young student passes by, scrolls cradled in both arms, eyes bright with something close to awe. Maybe she's carrying a newly translated work from India or Persia, words that will bend minds far from where they were first penned. Historians still wonder how much was truly lost in library fires, and how much simply faded away when readers stopped caring. Was it flame or forgetfulness that buried so many voices? You move to an alcove, where an older scholar rests his forehead against a stone pillar, lips moving silently, perhaps a prayer, or a struggle with a passage, too stubborn to yield its meaning. His breath smells faintly of wine and cloves, a small comfort against the cold weight of wisdom. On a marble lectern lies a half-finished copy of an herbal, drawings of leaves and roots so detailed they feel like they might flutter in a breeze. The scribe's notes in the margin mix complaint and curiosity, proof that behind every manuscript stands a human hand, sometimes cramped, sometimes playful. Beyond the main hall, you enter a smaller chamber lined with clay tablets pressed with cuneiform alongside newer vellum codices. The mix is almost tender a handshake across millennia. You can almost hear the scratching of stylus and quill echoing together in quiet defiance of time. A cat slinks through the doorway, tail high, eyes glinting gold in lamplight. It pauses beside you, then curls up atop a stack of scrolls, claiming the wisdom of ages as nothing more than a warm pillow. Outside, evening bells toll, their low notes vibrating through stone walls. You step into a courtyard open to the sky, the breeze scented with jasmine and wet stone. Scholars argue gently under the stars, their words rising and fading like candle flames in a draught. And here's a fact less spoken. While grand libraries drew the eye, many humble scholars worked alone. Copying texts by hand in flickering lamplight, sometimes adding quiet corrections or curious questions in cramped Latin or Greek, their anonymous marginalia sometimes survived longer than the grandest marble halls. You look up. Between the columns, the sky is a deep, impossible blue, the first stars blinking awake. The air feels cool against your skin, the scent of ink and dust lingering in your clothes. Historians still debate what truly drove the flowering of learning here. Royal patronage? It's the mixing of cultures by trade and conquest? Or simply the stubborn delight of minds hungry to understand the why behind every what? And as night deepens, you stand in the quiet courtyard, scrolls sleeping behind stone walls, and realize knowledge isn't just ink on parchment or marks on clades, a living chain of questions passed hand to hand. Each link forged in wonder. The breeze lifts your hair, and for a moment, the hush feels sacred, not because the words are old, but because someone, somewhere, will keep asking, keep writing, and keep reading. The hush of the library fades behind you, replaced by the low rumble of wheels over cobblestones and the sharp scent of torch smoke curling through dawn's chill. You step into a city so confident in its power that even its shadows seem carved from marble. The roads of ancient Rome, wide enough for legions, emperors, and the relentless march of history itself. Your sandals tap the familiar rhythm of empire on stone laid centuries ago, each slab worn smooth by countless feet traders, senators, slaves, and stonemasons alike. The smell of Rome is thick and layered, fresh bread cooling on wooden trays, the briny tang of fish sauce from open jars, and the acrid note of burning olive oil that feeds thousands of lamps. Ahead rises an aqueduct, arches marching across hills like frozen waves of pale stone. Historians widely agree these feats of engineering, channeling fresh water from miles away, helped Rome swell from village to metropolis. A city so large its heartbeat echoed across continents. You pause near a fountain where water, clear as glass, spills into a marble basin. Children chase each other, splashing and laughing, their laughter ringing off walls adorned with chipped frescoes and bright market banners. The water smells faintly of moss and limestone, a small luxurious miracle in a crowded city. Near the Forum, crowds swirl around vendors hawking amphorae of wine, figs glossy with syrup, and freshly minted coins stamped with the emperor's stern profile. You feel the press of bodies, the heat rising from sun-warmed stone, and catch snippets of conversation in Latin, Greek, and the softer accents of distant provinces. A senator in a white toga strides by, the purple stripe proclaiming power as clearly as a shouted order. But even power walks carefully here, where rumor and satire spread as quickly as fire on dry straw. You notice something oddly charming, graffiti scratched into plastered walls. Lines praising lost loves, mocking political rivals, or sketching crude cartoons of gladiators and gods alike. Proof that even at the empire's height, ordinary Romans couldn't resist leaving their mark. Past the Forum, the Colosseum looms a ring of arches so massive it feels less built than conjured. The smell of trampled straw, sweat, and old blood still lingers faintly in the stones, even though the roar of 50,000 voices has long since faded to memory. Historians still debate whether the games were purely distraction, religious duty, or something deeper. A ritual confrontation with fear, pain, and the spectacle of mortality. Standing in its shadow, you suspect it was all these things at once. You run your hand over pitted travertine, warm under the rising sun. Imagine the sand of the arena being raked smooth before each show, the scent of oil rubbed into gladiators' skin, the hiss of the crowd when the gates creaked open. Beyond the games, life in Rome bustles on, bathhouses steaming at dawn, the sharp scent of sulfur mingling with lavender oil. Libraries where scrolls whisper of philosophy and law. Narrow insulae where families crowd into upper floors above street-level shops. Here's a lesser-known truth. Much of Rome's power lay not in conquest alone, but in its road-stone ribbons, stretching across deserts and mountains alike. Messages, soldiers, and trade moved along them, binding the far corners of empire into something that felt, for a time, like one. You step aside as a cart rattles by, its wheels grooved from years of following the same tracks. The driver curses lightly at a stray dog that trots away, tail high, oblivious to human plans. The smell of wet hay and iron drifts after the cart, momentarily drowning out the sweeter scents of figs and honey cakes. As you climb the Capitoline Hill, wind cools the sweat on your brow. From the summit, the city sprawls below, red-tiled roofs, white marble temples, gleaming like scattered bones, and the snaking line of the Tiber, reflecting morning light. Historians still puzzle over why, after centuries of triumph, the city fell. Invading armies, economic strain, or perhaps the weight of its own ambition stretched too thin over lands and peoples it could never fully bind. Yet even in decline, Rome's influence echoes. Laws written here still shape modern courts. Latin words survive in everyday speech. And arches, domes, and roads built to millennia ago still carry weight, both literal and symbolic. As dusk drapes golden cloth over the city, oil lamps flicker to life. You hear the murmur of conversation spilling from taverns, the distant laughter of bathers, and the hollow clink of chisels in sculptors' workshops working late by lamplight. You sit on a worn marble step, the stone cool against tired legs, and feel something gently humbling. Rome was never one thing. It was builder and destroyer, lawgiver and rebel, citizen and slave, all layered together like fresco on plaster. And as the night air cools, carrying scents of laurel smoke, roasted meat, fresh-cut flowers offered at roadside shrines, you understand something softly profound. Empire fades. But the questions it raised about power, ambition, and what endures still linger. Whispering through ruined arches and broken mosaics, waiting patiently to be asked again. You slip quietly away from marble avenues and crowded forums into a place where the air feels older still. Cool, damp, and scented with moss, earth, and ancient wood smoke. The road here winds through dark forests and small clearings, where stone crosses and crumbling walls peek shyly through the undergrowth. Ahead, a monastery rises from morning mist, stone walls weathered and patched, ivy curling up toward narrow windows that catch the soft light like old glass. A bell tolls, its deep note vibrating through your chest as monks in rough wool habits walk in quiet procession toward the chapel. Your sandals crunch over gravel, and the scent of wet leaves and burning beeswax meets you at the threshold. The interior feels timeless. Cool air that smells of stone, dust, and incense, flickering candles casting moving shadows across carved saints who seem to watch in silent welcome more warning. Historians widely agree these monasteries, scattered like stepping stones across medieval Europe, became islands of memory, copying ancient texts, preserving philosophy, scripture, and poetry that might otherwise have been lost to flame, flood, or forgetfulness. In a scriptorium lit by narrow windows, you see robed scribes bending over wooden desks. The slow, deliberate scratch of quill on vellum becomes a soothing rhythm, as calming as the hush between breaths. Each letter drawn with care, each margin graced with a tiny flourish, sometimes a dragon coiling around a capital A or a monk's dry joke hidden in the corner. One scribe lifts his head, stretches stiff shoulders, and blows gently across wet ink to dry it. The faint scent of iron gall, ink sharp, almost metallic lingers in the cool air. Catch the look in his eyes. Quiet pride mixed with the ache of ours hunched over a single page. A lesser-known detail. Not all monks were silent scholars. Some jotted cheeky notes to each other in the margins. It is cold here, where this parchment is hairy. Small human echoes that survive alongside the solemn words of saints and scholars. Outside, the gardens hum with bees, moving among lavender, rosemary, and sage. You smell damp earth freshly turned, the herbal sweetness sharp in the morning air. A gardener monk pauses to brush soil from calloused hands, nodding as you pass. Further along the cloister, the stone arcades frame quiet courtyards where a fountain plays its gentle tune. You watch droplets catch the light before splashing onto mossy stone, a small, living reminder that even in strict silence, beauty speaks. In the library, rows of chained books gleam under dust motes, drifting like lazy spirits in sunbeams. Heavy wooden lecterns hold open volumes whose pages smell of age and oil, each word once shaped by hand in flickering candlelight. Historians still debate why, in an age of war, famine, and plague, these quiet places persisted. Was it pure faith, practical need, or something deeper, the stubborn conviction that words and ideas matter enough to copy, even when the world beyond the walls burned? Outside the walls, a traveler in road-stained cloak kneels to pray before continuing on. The road smells of wet leather, horse sweat, and crushed grass. You follow its bend until the monastery disappears behind oaks and mist, the bell's echo fading like a heartbeat receding into silence. Further on, you reach a small village clustered around a stone church. The air buzzes with chickens, goats, and human voices trading gossip and grain. Smoke rises from simple chimneys, carrying the scent of rye bread, wood fires, and boiling cabbage, a recipe older than memory. On the church door, you notice a carving worn smooth by countless hands. A pilgrim's scallop shell, perhaps, or a saint's cross, its meaning a little blurred now, but its presence unchanged. At a market stall, a woman sells beeswax candles shaped like tiny lambs and crosses. You lift one, its scent soft and sweet, imagining its flame flickering in a cottage window on a winter night, casting dancing shadows over worn walls. A monk walks by, his robe patched and faded, humming a hymn so softly it almost dissolves into the breeze. You catch only fragments of melody, carried off among the caw of crows and the rustle of leaves, and hear something quietly astonishing. In hidden scriptoria and cold stone halls, Monks and nuns preserved words in Greek, Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew, threads of knowledge that later scholars would weave into something broader, reaching across continents and centuries. As dusk falls, you hear the faint chant of vespers from the distant monastery, voices blending into a single, rising note. The smell of fresh rain drifts through the trees, mingling with wet earth and wood smoke. Historians still ponder how these places balanced solitude and connection, faith and scholarship, silence and song. Perhaps the answer lies in the patient rhythm of their days: prayer, work, and the slow, deliberate copying of thoughts meant to outlive them. You sit on a mossy stone by the roadside, twilight cooling the air around you. The last bell tolls, a single note that seems to hang forever in the falling dark. And in that hush, you feel something deeply gentle. That even when empires fall and cities burn, there have always been hands, quietly, stubbornly, passing words forward, one careful letter at a time. The tolling bell softens behind you as dawn creeps in, painting the road ahead with thin streaks of gold. You leave the hush of cloisters and the mossy embrace of forest chapels and step into the bright clamor of a city reborn in stone and glass. Before you rises a cathedral whose spires seem to scratch the sky itself. Each carved pinnacle crowned by saints, gargoyles, and monsters frozen mid-sneer. The air smells of cold stone dust, wet mortar, and hot wax melting in hundreds of tiny votive candles. You tilt your head back, neck craning until it aches, to see rose windows catch the new light, throwing fractured jewels of crimson sapphire, emerald across stone floors, worn by centuries of pilgrim feet. Historians widely agree these cathedrals, born of faith and fierce civic pride, were both houses of worship and statements of ambition. We were here. We mattered. Inside, your footsteps echo among ribbed vaults so high they feel like the ribs of a giant stone whale. The quiet hum of whispered prayers, the sharp crackle of candles, and the muted shuffle of feet create a gentle music that soothes even the most restless thoughts. A lesser-known detail. The great windows often held tiny scenes of everyday life: bakers, fishermen, and even stonecutters, hidden like playful signatures among biblical stories. Proof that the divine and the daily were never entirely separate. You run your hand over a cold column, fingertips brushing chips left by long-dead masons, and wonder if they could have imagined tourists centuries later craning for selfies, the flash of cameras sparking off medieval glass. Outside, the square bustles. Merchants shout above the bleat of goats, the smell of fresh bread and roasted chestnuts curling into the morning air. A troop of jonglers tumbles and jokes for coins. The clink of copper is real to them as the promise of heaven is to the pilgrims filing into the cathedral. The road winds on, past city walls bristling with towers. On the ramparts, guards pace with crossbows slung casually, their gaze fixed beyond markets and taverns to far horizons where threats always simmered. Historians still debate how these fortified cities balanced faith and fear, spires reaching heavenward beside moats dug to keep danger out. Was it hope or anxiety that built higher walls each decade? You follow the winding alleys where craftsmen shape raw iron into horseshoes and hinges. The smell of scorched metal mingling with sawdust from carvers shaping saints' faces in oak. One carver pauses to blow shavings from a half-finished angel whose eyes seem to watch you back. At a corner, the low murmur of students spills from a stone hall. Inside, scholars argue over Aristotle and alchemy, the air thick with ink dust, and the stubborn certainty that knowledge, no matter how dense or dangerous, must be pursued. You pass a guild hall, where merchants meet under painted beams, weighing coins, contracts, and rumor alike. The scent of beeswax polish and ink-stained parchment hangs around them, each trade recorded, each promise sealed with wax and a family crest. A soft joke slips from a stonemason's lips as he sharpens his chisel. "The devil built this wall crooked," he says, and his friends laugh, dust clinging to sweat-darkened tunics. Work is prayer too, they say. Each hammer strike a hymn in stone. And here's a fact to make you smile. Some cathedrals took so long to complete that generations of families labored on the same nave. Fathers and sons carving alongside each other under scaffolding older than they were. Evening settles slowly, the golden hour turning gray stone into warm honey. You step inside the cathedral once more, where organ notes roll through arches like gentle thunder. The smell of incense thickens, sweet and smoky, curling up in twisting spirals toward vaulted shadows. Historians still wonder how faith survived plague, famine, and war. Perhaps because cathedrals were more than stone sermons, they were shelters, schools, and stages for life's biggest questions, asked in whispers and shouted in song. Outside, the square quiets. Candlelight flickers in upper windows, and the last merchants shutter their stalls. The air cools, heavy with the scent of rain-wet cobbles and chimney smoke rising in lazy spirals. You pause, hand resting on a worn stone step, feeling the smoothness left by countless pilgrims who paused here too. Some seeking blessing, others simply resting weary legs. And as night deepens, the spires fade into darkness, but their shapes remain, outlined against stars. Even now, centuries later, they still dare to point upward, hope made visible in stone. As stubborn as faith and as fragile as breath, you step away from the shadow of the cathedral spires, guided by curiosity and the faint promise of salt on the breeze. The air changes as you walk downhill through winding lanes, sharper, brisker, tinged with tar, fish, and the faint metallic temps of sea spray carried inland by shifting winds. Ahead sprawls a bustling port city, its harbor alive with sails that ripple like seabirds' wings against the dawn sky. Masts rise in tight-packed forests, each creak and sway of timber matched by the slap of water against stone quays. The smell here is layered and alive, brine pitch, drying nets, and crates bursting with pepper. Cinnamon and indigo, so vivid it looks like solid dusk. You taste salt on your lips before you even see the foam curling against barnacle-crusted piers. Historians widely agree these ports, scattered along Europe's coasts and around the Mediterranean, became gateways not just for goods, but for ideas, music, and the quiet gossip of sailors whose words traveled faster than any ship. You pause beside a dock worker rolling a barrel onto a gangplank, sweat darkening his tunic. The wood smells fresh cut, but already bears scuffs from salt and rope. Beyond him, figures shout in languages you recognize only by cadence, soft southern syllables mingling with the clipped consonants of northern traders. A sailor, bareheaded despite the morning chill, laughs at a joke you miss, then curses softly as a gull steals a scrap of salted fish. You notice the small charm of bone strung on a leather cord at his neck, a quiet wish for luck that history rarely records. Further down the wharf, nets hang like lace curtains to dry, dripping brine that leaves white crusts on worn planks. The scent of drying kelp and tarry rope is strong. It's mixed with something sweeter, drifting from a spice merchant's stall. Cloves and nutmeg so potent they seem to warm the very air. Here's a lesser-known curiosity. Sailors sometimes carried dried oranges, not just for food, but as a ward against scurvy long before anyone named the disease. Small, sun-cured promises against an invisible enemy. At a counting house near the quay, merchants bend over ledgers thick with notes in half a dozen scripts. Their wax tablets scratched and rewritten until the wood beneath shows through. You smell ink and old beeswax, the air stuffy despite the open shutters. Historians still puzzle over what truly spurred Europe's age of trade and exploration. Gold, glory, God. Likely all three, tangled like the ropes, coiled neatly at every ship's bow. A breeze catches your hair, carrying the raw scent of open water. Beyond the harbor mouth, sails unfurl white and ochre, and stripe turning slowly to catch wind that smells of kelp beds and far-off rains. You walk along the quay, shoes damp from stray waves, and see ships loaded with wool, salt, cod, and barrels of sweet wine. Beside them, smaller boats bob lightly, fishermen unloading baskets of silver-scaled herring that gleam like hammered coins. A dock cat arches its back, rubbing against a mooring post darkened by years of tides. Its fur smells faintly of fish and wood smoke. Its indifference is as old as the sea itself. Above the harbor, bells toll in a stone tower, their deep voices rolling out across sails and gull cries. A moment later, the shouts on the quay shift rhythm. Crates move faster, lines tighten, as if the city's heartbeat has quickened by command. You notice a young sailor sketching something on a scrap of parchment, a new coastline, perhaps glimpsed on a voyage. Maps here are living things, patched, redrawn, and carried as secrets worth more than silver. And here's something gently funny. Even grand explorers sometimes sailed using maps that left entire oceans blank, marked only by fanciful sea monsters and warnings in curling Latin script. Here be dragons. As dusk approaches, lanterns bloom along the piers, reflections wavering like molten gold across the water. Air cools, salted mist brushing your face as ropes creak and sails furl tight for the night. Historians still debate whether it was hunger for wealth or sheer restless curiosity that pushed sailors beyond familiar coastlines. Perhaps it was neither fully rational nor purely reckless, but something deeply human, the desire to see what lay beyond the horizon. Night deepens, the last cargo unloaded. The scent of the sea blending with wood smoke drifting from tavern hearths where sailors gather. Laughter and song spill onto cobbles wet from high tide, carrying tales of storms, mermaids, and ports where spices grow like weeds. You sit on an old mooring post, the wood worn smooth by decades of tide and rope, and watch lantern light dance on the slow swell. Around you, the port breathes, living place, built on salt, sweat, and secrets whispered from ship to ship. And as stars emerge, you realize what these harbors truly traded was more than goods. They were crossroads of longing, promise, and quiet courage, the starting line of journeys, whose true cargo was always hope. The salt wind softens as you move inland, away from sails and tide-marked piers, and into narrow, cobbled streets lined with shuttered windows and smoke curling lazily from brick chimneys. The dawn carries a different scent here: roasted barley, wet clay, and the sour tang of fermenting grain. Ahead rises the low sprawl of a mill and brewery complex, wood-beamed buildings braced against centuries of wind and rain. Water wheels turn with a gentle creak, moss growing on damp stone channels where the river's current powers heavy grindstones. Your steps slow, caught by the rhythmic thump of wooden hammers, pounding cloth at a fulling mill, the air rich with wet wool and lye. Here the very sound of work feels ancient, steady, and almost hypnotic. Historians widely agree. This era Europe's first quiet revolution transformed fields and workshops into small engines of change. Windmills grinding grain, water wheels lifting irrigation, and blacksmiths' forges glowing longer into the night. In a courtyard, apprentices scurry under the watchful gaze of a master potter, their rough hands shaping wet clay into jugs and bowls. The smell of damp earth and kill smoke wraps around you, mingling with laughter when a pot collapses into a shapeless lump. Here's something easily overlooked. Even the humblest crafts like glazing pots with lead or pounding iron nails wove invisible threads of trade and innovation, connecting villages to distant cities and foreign markets. You pass a cooper fitting iron hoops around a barrel, sweat shining on his brow. His sewn-scented staves smell warm and sweet under the morning sun, destined to carry beer, wine, or salted fish to merchants across rivers and roads. Further on, a weaver beats a shuttle across a wooden loom, each slap echoing through the workshop. The raw wool smells faintly of lanolin, the dyed threads bright as wildflowers plucked from a summer field. Historians still debate how deeply these small technological shifts shaped medieval society. Did watermills free peasants from drudgery, or did they simply redirect labor into new trades? Perhaps both layered together in the slow rhythm of progress. Past the mill, a road winds uphill to a small town where guild banners hang from timber-framed houses, their painted symbols swaying gently in the breeze. Shears for cloth makers, crossed hammers for smiths, and golden sheaves for bakers. A bell chimes the hour, the metal note sharp against the soft murmur of morning. Asha. You taste fresh bread on the breeze-warm crust, tangy sourdough mingled with the sharper smell of horse sweat and straw near the stables. At a market square, the day unfolds. Traders spread linen on carts, setting out spices in tiny cloth bags. Lengths of dyed fabric and brass pins that glint in the sun. Shouts mingle with the clink of coin, and laughter rolls across the cobbles, as light and welcome as spring rain. Nearby, a young tanner stirs a vat with a heavy wooden pole, the air pungent with oak bark, wet hides, and something sharper that makes your eyes water. The work is harsh, but each leather strap and shoe sole leaves the town richer by a few coins. And here's an oddly sweet quirk. Medieval brewers often brewed small beer. It's barely alcoholic and drunk daily, even by children because it was safer than water from the well. soft everyday miracle of yeast and patience. As afternoon lengthens, the sun warms timber beams and whitewashed walls, drawing out scents of warm dust and drying herbs hung from eaves. Sage, thyme, and lavender meant to freshen both air and spirit. Historians still wonder how much these humble workshops and bustling markets fed into the wider currents of trade and culture that flowed beyond medieval walls. Perhaps progress was never a flood, but 1,000 small rivulets merging unseen. In a shaded corner, a scribe sharpens his quill, the faint scent of ink mingling with beeswax candles. His ledger records the day's sales dates and names that might seem mundane, but become history when enough years gather dust upon them. As dusk approaches, workers rest on barrels and doorsteps, sweat cooling on their skin. The smell of supper drifts through open windows, pottage thick with barley and onions, pork fat sizzling in iron pans, and the sharp temps of ale poured into wooden mugs. And when the first stars appear, the town softens into quiet. Wheels slow. Hammers rest, and only the gentle creak of a water wheel turning through the night remains a patient heartbeat of wood and water, whispering that change often begins not with kings or armies, but with hands steady at humble work. Evening's hush wraps itself around the town as you step away from the low hum of mills and markets, your path lit by lanterns swinging gently from iron hooks. The road ahead glows softly under a waxing moon, its silver light catching puddles left by an earlier rain and turning them into tiny mirrors of the sky. You follow this road past hedgerows fragrant with crushed mint and damp earth until rooftops fall away behind you and fields open wide under drifting mist. In the distance, a manor house rises, its tall windows flickering with candlelight, the scent of wood smoke curling lazily into the cold air. Inside, a great hall breathes with quiet confidence. Oak beams blackened by centuries of fire-hold banners that ripple faintly in warm drafts from the hearth. The air is thick with roasted meat, beeswax, and the sharp bite of wine poured into pewter cups. Historians widely agree these manorial estates became small kingdoms of their own, places where local lords and landed gentry held power, sometimes benevolent, often ruthless, woven into the fabric of rural life like gold thread and homespun cloth. At the high table, a lord lifts a cup carved with hunting scenes, the wine's aroma rich and spiced with cinnamon and clove. The cup's polished rim reflects torchlight, dancing beside shadows cast by antlers and ironwork that line the hall. Near the hearth, children chase each other over rushes strewn on stone floors. The dry scent of straw and crushed herbs rises underfoot, rosemary to sweeten the air, lavender to soothe restless spirits. A lesser-known detail: manor houses often kept bees in wicker hives beyond the orchard, their honey prized not only for sweetening ale and cakes, but as medicine for wounds and sore throats alike. Small wings humming behind high stone walls. You wander past carved settles and tapestries faded by sun and years. The cloth still shows hunters, saints, and strange beasts, with golden eyes, mythic figures whose shapes softened into blurred memory over time. In a side chamber, a steward in a fur-lined cloak tallies grain and cheese, the faint scent of ink mixing with candle smoke. Each entry in his ledger feels mundane, yet quietly significant, the record of a year's harvest, a winter's hope against hunger. Historians still debate whether the manor system preserved stability or stifled change. Yet within these walls, generations lived, worked, and dreamed under the same patch of stars. Beyond the walls, fields stretch dark and silent. The soil still smells warm from the day, carrying the scent of rye, wet clay, and trampled grass. You glimpse the distant spark of a crofter's hearth, a lone light in the wide quiet. By the stables, the earthy smell of horses, hay, and old leather wraps around you. A stable hand hums a tune older than memory, brushing the flank of a dappled mare whose breath clouds the chill night. A light joke drifts from the servants' quarters, teasing over burnt bread or a spilled pail. Laughter bubbles up, honest and brief, before settling back into the night's calm rhythm. At the edge of the orchard, you pause among gnarled apple trees. Even in darkness, the bark feels rough and alive under your palm, the scent of fallen fruit sweet and faintly fermented. A single owl calls overhead, its voice as ancient as the road itself. And here's something gently humbling, though Lord's names fill chronicles. It was often tenant farmers and stewards who quietly shaped daily life, deciding when to sow, when to reap, and how to feed a household through lean months. The breeze carries the mingled scents of distant hearths, damp earth, and crushed leaves. You feel the soft weight of history pressing lightly on your shoulders, not heavy, but steady, like a cloak worn by countless lives before yours. Historians still wonder why some manors rose into lasting estates, while others fell to ruin and ivy. Was it war, mismanagement, or the slow, patient shift of trade in towns drawing people away? Inside the hall dims as candles gutter low. The warm smell of burnt wicks and cooling embers mingles with the last traces of spiced wine and roasted meats. Conversation softens into murmurs, then silence. And as the moon climbs higher, silvering the fields and stone walls, you sense something deeply human within walls of wood, stone, or even humble clay. People have always gathered around shared meals, whispered secrets, and laid down to sleep, hearts steady in hope that dawn will come gently. The soft hush of the manor slips behind you as you follow a narrow path lit by moonlight, the stones still warm underfoot from the day's sun. You breathe in the cool air, tinged with damp grass and distant wood smoke, and step into a landscape changing faster than anyone could quite name. Ahead rises a town, unlike the quiet medieval boroughs you've walked. Before, half-timber bird houses leaning over crooked streets stand shoulder to shoulder with taller brick buildings whose windows glint with the promise of glass and trade. The smell here is restless. Wet cobblestones, coal smoke, horse sweat, and the sharp ink of freshly printed pages. A low hum vibrates through the streets even at dusk, the turning of water wheels and the hiss of bellows stoking iron-hot fires. This is a world waking into something new, where old certainties bend to the spark of invention. Historians widely agree the printing press lit that spark like dry tinder. Words once copied by candlelight and quiet scriptoria now tumbled into thousands of identical pages, carried far beyond monastery walls and city gates. You pause outside a print shop, where lead letters lie scattered like tiny bones on a compositor's tray. Ink stains the printer's sleeves and fingertips, the air around him rich with the bitter scent of oil-based black ink and scorched paper from a nearby stove. Through an open window, you glimpse pages hanging to dry, lines crisp and sharp under fluttering candlelight. A single printed sheet you realize can cross borders, stir revolt, or soothe a curious mind an ocean away. A lesser-known quirk. Early printers sometimes slipped personal jokes or tiny errors into margins, playful fingerprints of human hands in a machine-born age. Further on, the road widens. Carts rumble over cobbles, their wheels leaving ruts where rainwater gathers and reflects the shifting moon. The goods they carry tell stories, too. Dyed cloth from distant looms, sugar in rough brown loaves, and thin volumes bound in leather. Each with words bold enough to spark sermons or riots. Historians still debate which mattered more, trade's gold and spices, or the flood of ideas these new books carried. Perhaps it was never a choice gold-fueled presses. Presses shaped king's coffers in turn. In a narrow alley, you catch the clang of hammer on anvil from a blacksmith's forge. The scent of hot iron and burnt horn drifts around you, mingled with the fainter sweetness of a baker's late-night batch cooling on racks. You notice something gently poignant. A young apprentice, stained and bleary-eyed, copying a poem by hand despite the new presses. Proof that even in an age of speed, the old ways still had quiet power. Past the workshops, the city square opens wide, lanterns strung overhead like captured stars. Merchants, scholars, and sailors argue over coin and rumor alike. The air hums with impatience, curiosity, and something close to hope. And here's a curious fact. Pamphlets and broadsheets, once dismissed as cheap noise, shaped rebellions, fueled reformations, and gave voice to those who'd once only listened. You climb worn stone steps to a small tower. The view reveals rooftops stitched with chimney smoke, rivers snaking silver through marsh and field, and roads branching outward toward horizons unknown. The breeze up here tastes clean, laced with coal soot and the soft tang of night flowers growing wild in hidden courtyards. Historians still wonder why this age of trade, print, restless movement erupted where it did end, whether it was inevitable or born from countless small accidents of fate and choice. Below, the town settles into its nighttime rhythm. Press is quiet. Stables shuttered, and taverns humming with the day's last stories. The scent of warm ale, sweat, and spent candle wax drifts into the night. You walk back through lantern-lit streets, your reflection swimming in puddles between cobbles.
Ow.
The press's quiet power lingers in your mind. Letters once so rare they were prayed over, now cast and reset like everyday tools, yet still able to wound, heal, and change the shape of the world. And as the moon slides behind drifting clouds, leaving only the soft glow of lamps and the hush of turning wheels, you sense the heartbeat of something larger than any one city, a civilization leaning forward, restless, curious, and forever unfinished. And now, as the lanterns dim and the presses slow, let your breathing match the slow turn of those ancient wheels, steady, calm, unhurried. Picture yourself walking back through moonlit streets, each step softer than the last, the scent of old paper, warm stone, and damp earth fading gently behind you. Feel the weight of centuries slip from your shoulders like a cloak you no longer need to carry. The world around you grows quieter, softer, until the rustle of parchment becomes the hush of your own breath. Imagine distant bells tolling far beyond hearing, their echoes rolling gently across fields and rivers, fading into a night sky scattered with stars older than any history you've walked through. Let your eyes drift closed, thoughts slowing like a candle burning low. The road you've traveled tonight, the cities, the spires, the markets, the silent scriptoriums narrows to a single, comforting path. The calm rhythm of your own heartbeat. Breathe out and know that the questions left behind, why kingdoms rise, why words matter, why hope endures can wait until tomorrow. For now, there is only this soft darkness, the gentle press of sheets, and the promise of dreams where history and memory blend into quiet story. Sleep, traveler, knowing you've walked through ages and stand gently at the edge of dawn. The road will still be here when you wake,